together soon. So with that, you can see the recording has started, and let's look at our agenda together. So we are already in the welcome part, and then we will kick off with Germany's approach to digital-ready policymaking. So I'm really pleased to have colleagues from German administration with us today, followed by questions from you and answers by them. And then we will also present what we are cooking in the Commission when it comes to digital-ready checks, and the same applies. We are really happy for any feedback, and then we will wrap up together. So starting along those lines, let's see who we are from the Commission hosting this event. So myself, I'm Zsófia Szirányi, and I'm here today from my team with Alessio and Nertin, and we are members of the Commission Digital Ready Policymaking team. And this team is also behind a living and hopefully continuously growing community placed on the Join Up platform, where we deal with topics around digital ready policymaking, like how to create digital ready policies, what technology can bring into lawmaking, and also we dedicate quite some interest and focus on how to streamline regulatory reporting and related burden. So all this comes together in our digital ready policymaking topic, and you can explore more on our Join Up page. And already just a hint for you who managed to join, by the way, soon we would also like to rebrand our community called Digital Ready Policymaking. But what is Digital Ready Policymaking? And this is what we can see at the next slide. So in a nutshell, I would say that for me, Digital Ready Policymaking is really a mindset which intends to bridge the gap between policy design and policy implementation. So it's super important in my view that whenever policy team starts to create a new policy proposal and creating related legal requirements, they think through in advance how this will be implemented. And nowadays implementation almost always entails digital. So how it will be digitally implemented. And it's very important because then we can expect that this implementation can go smoothly. And of course, to that happen, policy officers cannot do it on their own. They will need a multidisciplinary team. They will need colleagues with IT, with data, with implementation knowledge to accompany them in this endeavor. So if they approach policymaking like that with this mindset, then we can expect that they will create policies which are digital ready and apply digital technologies and use the most of data. And why to bother all of that? Beyond that, I'm calling you that it's super important. It's the reason because basically now we live this digital world, and as I said already, digital services, digital implementation of policies are the standard rule of thumb. And also we can see that in the EU policy landscape, there are more and more commitments to digitalize, transform our society and economy in a digital way. So you can see some related main policy initiatives on the screen. And also we are very proud of one specific one which will be adopted soon, and this is the Interoperable Europe Act proposal, which already got an agreement for the co-legislators in November and supposed to be adopted early next year. And it has, among many other interesting aspects, a new instrument called interoperability assessment, which will merit a topic on its own because it will hopefully very much initiate more digital ready thinking. And then eventually digital ready policymaking brings concrete benefits. So it can ensure better policy coherence, more timely and smoothly policy implementation, but it can also give room for future-proofing, digital experimentation, and altogether we can expect a more interoperable and consistent IT landscape. So to start with, I really wanted just to give this nutshell scene setting. So what is digital ready policymaking? Why is it important? And then today we will very much focus on how to help policy people and maybe others to implement and go for digital ready policy making. And I think this is where digital ready checks can come in. But let's see how the German colleagues position it, and then also what is our practice in the Commission. But before that, this is now the moment that we look at the Slido questions. So if we move on, you can also again see on the screen the QR code, and in the chat, I think we could also post, if it's not yet done, yes, the link and the code. So I invite you to go there. And now I presented myself and Alessio, and we would like to also get a little bit of hint who you are in this virtual room before I introduce you our speakers of the day. So hopefully you managed all now to connect to the Slido environment, and then we can put on the screen the results. So voila, I see that you are still busy answering, and already almost 20 of you are around. I see colleagues from Sweden, from Germany, of course, from Brussels, and the Benelux, Netherlands, and Luxembourg, but also we have some warm spirit from Spain, which is badly needed here in the coldish Brussels, at least. Okay, so very nice of you of taking the time to answering. Just to show that yes, we are indeed in a European setting. Thanks. Malta is also around. Very nice. Bulgaria. Hello to Bulgaria and Ireland. Wow, I'm really impressed. It's really the European spirit. Excellent. Thank you. So let's move on. And of course, keep answering. If you just open the link, no worries. You can scroll through the questions at your ease. So let's see the professional background. Do we get this mixity? No need, please, to bring back the Slido question. If the Slido link and code is in the chat, then those of you who come a little bit later can check in the chat where to go to the questions and now just see the results. And yeah, I encourage you to come and answer. So we see a lot of IT interest, but also policy making, even specifically economics and public policy. Excellent. We have even regulations from labor area. So we have then law, legal, and economics, technology, communication. And voila, someone is really bringing in the legal aspect with working in a digitalization agency. So it's almost a multidisciplinary team, one person itself. Linguistic, very interesting. Translations, super relevant also for digital ready. It can be linguistic translation, but I think it's also a big challenge to translate between policy colleagues and IT colleagues. It can be a translation on its own. Okay, I see the number is going up. You are finding the survey. Let's move on then. For the next question is the question of what is your experience with digital ready policymaking? Well, so we have the German digital checks. Some of you either working on it or already using it. Some of you have absolutely limited newcomers, so welcome. It's the right place to start. And others, you will be ready to jump in with 15 years of experience to give some ideas for us, because this is absolutely a humble approach from our side to learn mutually from each other. Some of you have absolutely interest in reducing bureaucracy and burden, or working on digital transformation. Wow, I see. I like this rapidity, reliability, accuracy, like key values or principles for go ahead. And some of you are more on the implementation side, which is very relevant as well, because I truly believe that policymaking should benefit from the implementation, and others working on Interoperable Europe Academy on courses and learners. So welcome to everyone with all these spices and flavors, and maybe just close with the last questions, what you would like to take with you today. So what is your expectations towards us? We can always adapt or try to adapt. So learn about the EU approach, best practices, understand what it is at all. Okay, curiosity, it's the super drive for many of us. Learning, first time here, welcome. Super. Okay, so with all this, well, our German colleagues can already prepare with some expectations, understand details. Some wants to get the big pictures, others the details right away. So Jakob and Katharina, you will see it's a challenge. But then with that, I turn to our two speakers today, and we can bring back the slides, please. So I'm very happy to welcome today here with us Katharina Berndt and Jakob Häußermann. The two colleagues represent two different administrations. So Katharina works as an advisor in the digital transformation and digital ready policy making unit at the Federal Ministry of the Interior and Community of Germany. And she already had different positions, both in the ministry, but also interestingly worked for the National Audit Office on Stockholm. So you must have been happy to see Swedish participants around. And Jakob worked as a project lead for the DigitalService of Germany. This is the federal government's central digitalization unit, and his focus lies on digital-ready policy and joint work with the ministry from which Katharina is with us. So with that, the floor is yours, and we are really curious to learn from the Germans' experience.
Thank you for the introduction, Sophia. I'm just wondering, is the sound good? Can everybody hear us?
Yes, the sound is perfect.
Great.
And the slides are coming. You will move them in presentation, and it will be great. It's loaded. Here we are. Everything's set. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. And thank you again for the introduction. My name is Katharina, and I work for the Federal Ministry of the Interior and Community in Germany, in Berlin. And my colleague Jakob is sitting right in front of me. You can't see it, but I can see him. He works for the federal government's central digitalization unit, the DigitalService. And together we developed the approach, which we will present for you today. Very grateful to be here and to have the possibility to present what we are working on. And we are very curious about your questions and your feedbacks then in the end of our short presentation. So we can switch to the agenda. Today we would like to introduce you to the German approach to digital-ready policy making. We will give you a brief introduction to the scope and methodological approach and share some insights from almost 1 year of digital-ready policy making in practice. At the end, as I said before, we would like to discuss your questions and your feedback. We know that for political initiatives to be successful, the implementation is crucial. We also know that the impact orientation and user-centeredness are important premises of good modern administration, both in the drafting process and when it comes to implementation. In this way, by producing digital-ready law, we lay the basis for a proactive and modern state, which offers its citizens application-free and automatized services. As, for example, you can see on the slide, in the case of the payment of an allowance for students during the pandemic, or in case of automated payment of the German child benefit. The aim is that federal laws can be easily implemented digitally in the federal states, the municipalities, and in the private sector, so that political goals can be achieved more easily.
So to lay out the foundation of the view on what digital-ready policymaking is about at its core, we use this illustration because we found, and these two examples show, that often policies lay the foundations for digital services. So they can either support the digital implementation of services and the user-friendly implementation of digital services, or they can even hinder or avoid the implementation of digital services. So this illustration shows what digital policymaking then is about at its core. It's just about the process, how government considers and integrates aspects of digital implementation in the process of designing new policies. So considering implementation aspects of how services or policies will be implemented digitally in the policymaking process and how that process works. And this needs to be improved in digital-ready policymaking, so that the communication processes, the collaboration processes between implementation and policymaking works better. And digital-ready policymaking is the standard, so to say, for policymaking in general.
When we look at the political mandate for the digital-ready policymaking approach in Germany, there are 4 cornerstones. To begin with, the federal government outlined in its coalition agreement 2021 to improve the quality of laws and regulations and to examine the possibility of their digital implementation early on in the legislative process by introducing the approach. Other cornerstones are anchored, the approach is also anchored in the government's digital strategy and in a cabinet decision from August this year and in the National Regulatory Control Council's Act. So this is quite a potpourri of mandate giving sources, right? To sum up our mission, one could say that the objective is to promote an effective and user-centered implementation of political initiatives by digital-ready policymaking. How do we do that? By enabling policymakers to create digital-ready and practicable regulations through suitable tools and support programs fitting their specific needs to produce digital-ready and practicable legislation. We want to harness the opportunities provided by digital implementation when drafting new laws for a proactive and digital state.
Yes, so and how did we do this since the beginning of this year? So as Katharina said in the beginning, the Digital Check in Germany, the general approach for digital-ready policymaking has been rolled out and implemented since the beginning of this year. And what we're doing since the beginning of this year can be like divided in 3 different streams. And the first one is a easy to use guide and instructions, a guideline for policymakers when they're designing and drafting and creating new policies and new regulations. This guide is basically consisting of 2 steps. So there's a pre-check by which policymakers can identify whether or not their regulation has a digital dimension or not. And if it has, then there is the supporting document based on 5 principles for digital-ready policymaking, which we developed with all the different ministries beforehand. And based on these principles, they are methodological and content-related hints how policymakers can then use those methods and those principles in their drafting and creation of new regulations. This is, so to say, the obligatory part each policymaker has to consider when drafting new regulations since the beginning of January this year. But beyond this checklist, you could say, we also realized that there needs to be like a different methodological support, because just a checklist, just a guideline won't really help policymakers to really think about digital implementation in their regulatory work. And this is why there's also 2 different and other streams which we are working on, which help policymakers to really work differently in their policymaking processes. And the second one is we're designing and developing and then providing, of course, different methods and tools for creating regulations. And one key method here is visualizations, because what we immediately saw that is when policymakers visualize and even develop modulations of their regulations, it really helps them to find inconsistencies and think about data flows and how the digital implementation is actually foreseen in their regulation. So for that, we provide different methods and tools, for example, for visualization. And the third part then is, and I think you also mentioned that in the beginning, Sophia, all of that is really some kind of a mindset change or a culture change in the policy making work, because what we really need to do is that to change how policies are being made in general, so that you really think about the implementation and the digital implementation from the beginning on. And this is some kind of transformation that really is to be supported by different support measures for, in the end, digital ready policies. And for that, we provide and establish a support for email, phone, and via online consultations, but we also develop workshops, and we are even supporting selected regulatory projects to really help policymakers to work differently on their regulations. Yeah, maybe just one step or one closer to the aspect of visualizations, because it's really a key method in our view for digital-ready policymaking, and visualizations help for different aspects to really improve policies. So that the first step is that they really help for an alignment across organizations, across actors, but also across levels, so that you really have a shared understanding of policies, of how they work, of what their impact should be, and how the implementation is actually regulated. So visualizations help really for cross-organizational alignment, but they then also help, of course, to understand data flows when you think and visualize the implementation processes of your regulation. Or they also help to identify logical inconsistencies. For example, when you see there is some kind of step missing, or the different criteria are not really defined as clearly as possible. And beyond that, then also visualizations actually help to facilitate the digital implementation for the implementation actors in the end. Because if they can use how the visualization of the regulation, they can much easier implement the regulation digitally. And all of these three different visualizations you can see here are actually visualizations we actually had developed by policymakers in the DigitalService process throughout this year already. So as we said, we wanted to share some empirical insights. So because we implemented, rolled out this approach with the beginning of this year, and on the left side you can see some numbers of where we are today. We have a general application rate of 83%. So what does it mean? 72 regulations or laws actually have applied the DigitalService of 87 laws in general, or in total. So we're quite proud of this quite high application rate after a couple of months, as it is a completely new task within the ministries. We also rolled out quite a number of workshops with different participants from almost all the different ministries that are actually engaging in regulatory work. And we also provided and established actually the support measures we mentioned earlier. So we had 61 answered support cases, and these are can be very small email contact, but also workshops, or like more established, more elaborated support measures. And already after a couple of months, we can see some effects on different levels. So this is just some examples of what we can actually see for impact after a couple of months. So, for example, there were written form requirements removed in some laws, so that Schriftformerfordernis, that we say in Germany, don't hinder the digital implementation in the end. We also see in some regulations that they actually enable the reuse of data, so that data doesn't need to be collected a second time when it's already available for different authorities. And we also see that automatization clauses have been implemented, and concepts have been defined, so that automatization of processes can be possible later on in the implementation. And what is particularly exciting for us is that these visualizations are increasingly used throughout the process for better understanding of data flows, or to facilitate the communication with, for example, implementation authorities. And here we see that in the third quarter of 2023, almost 30% of relevant new regulations have already visualized their processes. And this is only after a couple of months really working on this visualization aspect in the policymaking process. And this is quite a high number, we think. So to conclude, we are iteratively developing the different measures of the DigitalService, or for digital-ready policymaking. So we started with a basic guideline, and then we developed, based on the data we collected on how policymakers work with it, and what challenges they have, and what possibilities we find to really help policymakers to work differently in their regulatory work, and to consider digital implementation aspects. We collect different kinds of data, we analyze these data, and then we develop different prototypes and solutions, and check if they really work within the regulatory processes. And currently we focus on two different approaches. So we develop a tool that really helps policymakers to visualize new regulations, because there we find still different challenges that policymakers really engage and work with visualizations. And the second stream is that we set up and already did set up this interdisciplinary task force with engineering and design competencies. And this interdisciplinary task force can then really help support policy teams in their work. So thank you for your attention. We are very happy to hear from you, to get in touch if you have questions. But we also have, to kickstart the discussion, 2 questions via Slido. So we would be really interested to know what your opinion is, how effective our, so to say, holistic approach to digital-ready policymaking is. So how effective that might be in your view, in your experiences, and also what you probably like the most about the approach we just presented, what you found most promising, probably. So if you can again use Slido for that and give us some feedback on these 2 questions, we'd be really happy to know more about your opinions. And with that, I think I don't know, I hand over to.
Yeah, excellent. But I also let you, I can take from here. Many thanks. I already voted quickly, so I have clearly my preference. But while colleagues are going to the Slido, actually you already have questions. So maybe you can take 1 or 2 and then we'll see the results. So Anna asked for, I guess, the modeling tool. What is the tool you use to the visualization process?
That's a very interesting question. And currently there's quite a variety of tools that are actually used within the ministry. So each ministry has or is providing different software instruments from MS Visio to different Adonis really modeling tools. And we're still trying to find out which tools are really usable for policymakers, because often these visualizations and modeling tools are not made for policymakers, but they are actually made for different users and with different needs. So we are working with the different tools that are currently existing within the ministries. It's like really a variety of tools, and we're trying to find out which tools can be used for policymakers in their context, and also thinking about how we can improve those tools that are existing, and which one do we need to improve to make it like better usable for policymakers in their contexts and their needs.
And if I may add my question, because it was also on my forefront, that how easy it is for policy officers in this to use these techniques, and yeah, how do you have that? And on the tooling, are these open source tools so easily available, or do you need to buy licenses? How does it work?
I think this is also depending from ministry to ministry, but of course the ministry as such has to buy licenses, and then of course the individual needs to apply to get one in order to be able to use the tool. So I think sometimes the process to finally be able to use the tool can be quite complicated, and we are right now scanning the landscape to understand what is and what measures you need to take in order to be able to use the tools, and then to bundle this information up to make it easier accessible for policymakers.
So this is on the tooling, thank you. And then eventually the skills of policy officers to start playing around with these tools, how does it going, or how do you help that process?
Yes, so that's a very good question, and that's a huge part of the workshops I mentioned earlier. So we actually had a workshop again the day before yesterday here, where we showed 20 policymakers why and how they can actually visualize their regulations. And often policymakers, through their education, they are not really close to how they can actually use visualization techniques. They often have a legal background, probably. And so really need to show how they can make a first step towards visualization, very complex regulatory issues, and then also use different software techniques for that. But it's also an educatory and task for us to really explain how and why it's important to visualize regulations. And for that, we have had a number of workshops with policymakers, and policymakers are really interested to know more about and visualization, how it helps them. So these workshops go really well in our opinion.
I look in the questions and it's huge. So really a lot of questions on the tooling. I reassure the audience we will try to take the most of them. If not, I invite already Jakob and Katharina to follow up maybe afterwards, but let's them. Still on the tooling, whether you have an English version, you got also suggestions from Anna, whether you have explored a specific tool for rulers code, Harvard's tool. But okay, there is the concrete question of English version, but also interesting from Cecile that how do you ensure the streamlined visualization practice, meaning who and how manages the blueprints and the changes. So if there is one flow already, who is in charge of managing the visual?
The first question, we don't have any tools in English yet, because the official language and the German ministries is German. So there's not really, I don't know if there's a need, maybe there's a need, but we don't have any. And we are in such an early stage with the visualizations that there is not a single point or a contact person handling visualizations and following the changes. So these are really individual projects. The one policymaker sitting in front of his or her text and trying to visualize on the side. So this is really, baby steps, and we are in the beginning of learning and understanding. Of course, we see that policymakers need support and need help because sometimes the tools are very complicated. So this is not something that you can learn.
I advise that we move now a little bit away from the tools. I saw also from my team members suggestions that we can definitely help with mapping some open source tool, because open source is also on our interoperability digital ready agenda in the commission. But we have also questions around reusing data, the once only principle. So Jasper is asking, how does reusing data align with privacy acts? And do you face any issue when you want to reuse data collected under another policy?
Yes, so of course that's a delicate issue, and often if you want to support policymakers to make data reusable, we often also have, basically these are two principles of the 5 principles. So one is make data reusable, as standards reusable, and on the other hand also consider data law and data security issues. And of course, you have to balance both aspects. And we see regulations. There was one a couple of weeks ago where actually data has been made reusable, and to make implementation easier so that processes can be easier. But then, of course, we had data regulation, data law, data security issues. So I think you need to look at each specific case and see how you can handle it in the specific context. But in general, I think it shouldn't be a general consideration that the reuse of data and the once only principle isn't possible to implement because of data security issues. I think, often we just need to look at the specific case, and then the reuse of data is probably implementable or just for specific context. Possible.
Okay. Another main topic, but before raising it, I just remind everyone, while we're already in the discussion, don't forget to go to Slido. I see answers arriving, but if you haven't done so, you see on the screen the link, the code, the QR code. So we will at the end just reward our speakers to see your answers to their questions, but let's tease them with your questions in the meantime. So there is another topic on this multidisciplinary teamwork aspect. So one question is that for this multidisciplinary team, or interdisciplinary, how you phrase, these are colleagues from the same policy unit, or you invite maybe external consultants to go to the policy file and help them? So how this interdisciplinary work eventually functions. And related to that, there is also a cultural question that how do you tackle the challenge that sometimes there are biases between legal people and IT people against each other. So could be a kind of cultural gap and how to bridge it. So this is 2 questions combined, if you wish to take them.
I think bridging the cultural gap is hard work for everybody involved. Because, I mean, everybody who was in the call, you know, we're working on transforming a working culture. And transformation is always, yeah, you need to repeat and repeat and repeat your message. And this is what we're doing. And I think, what else can we do? And for the interdisciplinary teams right now, the team is set up of colleagues to Jakob from the DigitalService. And in the future, we would like to have interdisciplinary teams in the ministries, but we are not there yet.
Okay, so now you are going to complement their teams and bringing this business process view and analytics. Is it correct? Okay. We have also a question whether is there any end-to-end, meaning from incomplete policies to complete implementation experiences. Any examples on a specific policy from legislation to local implementation? So it's also a question whether you already managed to follow through the flow of newly set digital-ready policies until the implementation.
That's
did it become really easier?
No, that's a very good question. We'd be really curious actually to have those examples. But as we just started with the beginning of this year, a lot of the new laws and regulations that were like implemented or adopted now in the last couple of weeks and months, we're already prepared. So we're really looking forward to have those examples where we can accompany and support those cases from the start now and really see how they will be implemented in the next couple of months and years, because this process takes a couple of months, maybe even years. So we really need to follow this process for a longer period of time, I think. But we are really looking for these examples to really follow them through the whole process, from policymaking to implementation. So that's really important to really see how it works and where we need to improve our measures in the very beginning of the process.
Yeah, and then I think it also answers another questions from Jasper asking whether you can check the perception of citizens, whether they really find it easier or harder to understand such a regulation. But I guess that here you would also need time to somehow measure the citizens' perception. And we also had a question on evidence preservation. So how do you go about preserving evidence generated during the formulation of a policy and make it available for next iterations and or control replication purposes? So basically the data you feed for a new digital-ready policy proposal, evidence, how do you manage it afterwards? Is there any practice you're recommending on that?
That's a very good question. We were not having any measures or methods or tools for that yet, but I think what we're working on right now is like the visualization, and this could be a very good instrument also to document how those visualizations maybe changed after, I don't know, feedback from implementation actors, after feedback from IT experts, and like to document those iterations and those changes that have made to the process based on the visualization. I think this is something we need to look at, but we haven't made any or implemented any measures on that yet.
Okay, thank you. I see that the colleague from the publication office of the Commission appreciated already this idea how to proceed. And I think time now to go to see the results, but also I see that, for example, Massimo became really inspired by the visualization, asking what about the possibility of using graphics in law proposals themselves? It would be an innovation. Would it be accepted? I guess it's more for our lawyers and would need quite some cultural change to go. But I don't know whether what's your view of Jakob or
yeah, I think that's a really good, that's a very good, maybe also last question, because I think it's an innovation. And but I also responded already in the chat that in German case, you already have 3 visualizations published via the National Scrutiny Board, or the National
Wow.
Control Body, which is an important actor in the digital policy process in Germany. There are also colleagues from that institution here, and they publish a statement on how the digital aspects have been considered. And in 3 cases, visualizations have already been published in that statement. So I think we're already on that, and
Okay.
it's quite interesting to see how quick also, in my view, that already changed, because the publication of those visualizations is really a huge step, I think.
Okay, many thanks for taking the questions, and I request the team to put on the slide the results. And in the meantime, staying with the innovation, I would already a little bit promote upcoming webinars, because if you want to innovate, you could even think low as code. So beside bringing in graphics in legislative proposals, you could even think of coding them and making them machine consumable from the start. So we will explore this topic further in our January talk, just for a kind of teaser. And let's see the first answers. So voila, in your opinion, how effective is a holistic approach to digital-ready policymaking like the German ones? And clearly, basically, effective and really effective. So clearly you set here a good practice to follow, I believe, based on the feedback of the colleagues. And if you allow, and please keep answering, because we can still go back later on, and I think it's a precious treasure for our speakers to find your answers later on. And what did you like most about the German approach to digital-ready policymaking? So kind of summary, the tool says us that workshops and tools were highlighted, but I see the visual approach mentioned. Visualization techniques, but also the offering of a comprehensive service. So not only visualization, but we heard also about the interactive workshops and the upcoming guidance mechanisms. Okay, we see here that we have also still questions coming up, but I think we partially answered this cultural bit, how they get acquainted with the tools. So visualization, key enabler for consistency and understanding of legislation, very much appreciated. There is some feedback. You see that communication with enforcement authorities sounds good. However, I'm missing digital enforcement measures or digital measures to trigger behavior change of the target groups of legislation, like citizens, businesses, for example, to reduce high costs of official controls, as in food safety. So it's very specific. Jakob or Katharina, please come in if you have any thoughts around this comment. And then if we move down, just before wrapping up, iterative approach and maybe interactive approach, visualization, realistic to implement, achievable. So it's really pragmatic, easy guide methods, multidisciplinary. There's still more questions coming up. Voila, very good. But on that, we also had some answers. And guidance, both for business, both for legal, the iterations, it came up. And let's move down. Still visualization, very exciting. And very interesting questions, how hectic or difficult was to get the political mandate. But I think it was kind of coming first. What was the mandate coming first, or did you do some lobbying for that?
When I started working on the digital ready legislation approach, the mandate was already in place. So I don't know really. Sorry.
Okay, so here it was maybe started also from the mandate. So I remember my team member Isa followed the Norman Control Rat study already from 21 or even before. No, it must be even before, on looking into the importance of digitalization. Okay, and I think this is the end, coming to the visualization, and I think see here and there a thank you, and this is where I would like to close as well. Thank you. It was really enriching, and also thank you, the community, because you were great with so many ideas and questions. So it's the intention to learn mutually. And this applies also for our presentation now, where I hand over to my colleague Alessio on the digital ready checks in the Commission. So please bear with us and keep your constructive mindset to help us improve our practice. Alessio.
Thank you very much, Sophia, for your kind introduction. So instead, I'm going to present the approach taken by our team in the European Commission related to digital ready policymaking, and specifically a guidance tool we have been developing, the digital ready checks. So as you can see in the slide, the digital transformation is a political priority for the European Commission, and we think that digital ready policymaking supports that priority. This was also reiterated in 2021 Better Regulation Agenda, where there was a shift towards the incorporation of digital considerations early on into policymaking. In particular, there was a focus on identifying and exploiting opportunities to simplify legislation, streamline procedures, and eliminate unnecessary burdens through the use of digital solutions. This also involves a commitment to apply the digital by default principles, ensuring that digital considerations become a fundamental component of our some policymaking methodologies. Subsequently, 1 year after, in the European Commission Digital Strategy of 2022, this was highlighted again, putting digital ready policymaking high on the agenda as one of the strategy's specific objectives, and identifying a series of follow-up actions. In particular, the actions that were identified were the launch of a pilot, the launch of the piloting of a digital ready policymaking support service, which aims to provide advice and fostering a culture of awareness on the importance of digital ready policymaking throughout the entire policy cycle within the European Commission. And then this was followed up by an expansion of the available trainings, ensuring that the teams are not just equipped that the teams have all the necessary knowledge to apply these digital ready considerations across the policy cycle. And finally, we have launched also, we have been working on the digital ready checks, which is a survey structured around the 6 key components of digital ready policymaking, making therefore easier to pinpoint areas for improvement. And today we are exactly presenting this tool, our first iteration of it, which is based on tool 28 of the Better Regulation Toolbox. Their main objective is to raise awareness and help implement digital ready guidance across the European Commission. And they particularly aim to provide a digital readiness score of the policy, which aims to support in identifying whether the team has included digital ready considerations in policy design, and it aims to provide a set of actionable recommendations tailored to the specific answers to help the policy team fill in the gap. Furthermore, as we will see later, it directs policymakers to the relevant services that can offer support in case specific knowledge is needed. Secondly, these checks support in the identification of the mandatory digital requirements stipulated by the Better Regulation Agenda. And finally, the digital ready checks can provide an initial idea of whether this policy will need to undertake an interoperability assessment and or an ICT impact assessment. We think that digital ready considerations are essential at every step of the policy cycle, but we think that the key is to start as early as possible. So as soon as we plan and strategize, we suggest taking the digital ready checks to detect the policy's IT needs and set an initial direction. However, we also think that it's important to iterate over these initial results and that we suggest of retaking the digital ready checks also at different stages of the policy cycle, so as to have a complete overview. In terms of specific structure, for now the tool is in the form of a quiz via EU survey, and it is based on multiple choice questions. After their completion, it will be possible to view the outcome of and the suggested actions in the results section. We estimate an average of 20 minutes to complete. And as I mentioned before, they're structured around the 6 components of digital ready policymaking. They are a dynamic survey, so the number of questions that the policy team will need to answer will vary based on such answers. For example, here we put the first question as a demonstration. So the first question concerned the identification of business processes that will be affected by the policy initiatives. And of course, if the team has not identified the business processes yet, it would be difficult to answer to the second question, which involves whether they have considered how this business process can be modified having users' needs in mind, and therefore the question will not appear and the user will be directed to question 2. In terms of the results, based on the answers given, as previously mentioned, the digital ready checks will provide a set of recommended actions, such as consult the repository of existing legislations and policies in the digital domain, or ensure that the stakeholder consultation covers explicitly the digital aspects, or also contact your local data correspondent, the EC Data Advisory Service, or the Evidence Transparency Service, which are all support services that could provide useful advice in order to refine and improve the policy proposal. However, first of all, before presenting the tool, we want to be clear that this is just the first iteration of the digital ready checks, and that we already identified that it presents some limitations. For example, it requires the users to place themselves in the digital readiness scale, and we are currently working on improving the user experience and on developing a user journey to better visualize the process. Then, of course, the surrounding context is in continuous evolution. For example, the guidelines on the interoperability assessment are being co-designed with member states, and they're not ready yet, so they cannot be incorporated at this stage in the digital ready checks. And therefore, because of this, we have been adopting an iterative approach, observing member states' experiences, such as, for example, the German ones, that also in their website we have a very nice description of how they have been developing this methodology, and we took inspiration from it. So moving on to the user journey, we wanted to show you more at the practical level how this tool works through the eyes of a totally fictitious user persona, Dr. Elena Costa, that works in DG Santé in the European Commission. She is a medical doctor with a specialization in healthcare policies, and she has a mix of medical expertise and policy experience. And her work mainly revolves around promoting health and ensuring healthcare accessibility across the EU through evidence-based policies and medical insights. So starting the user journey, she is in charge of a policy team at DG Santé, and the European Commission has already committed to enhance the accessibility to healthcare services across the EU. And she also recently became aware that as of next year, before taking a decision on new or substantially modifying the binding requirements of Trans-European Digital Public Service that have an effect on cross-border interoperability, it will be mandatory to carry on an interoperability assessment. Her team, although, is not really sure whether their policy proposal would have such an effect, and she's looking for more information on the matter. Fortunately, DigiDigit has introduced this online tool designed to facilitate the iterative improvement of policy proposals and identifying the requirements of better regulation concerning digital aspects, the Digital Ready Checks. This tool offers suggestions and recommends potential next steps for the team as they work towards refining the proposal. It also can also support the policy team in identifying the relevant services that could help them along the way. So taking charge of this policy proposal, Elena initiates this process and assigns this specific file to herself and her unit. She begins the survey and fills in some contextual information. And then with the support of her team, seeking their expertise in their respective fields, collectively progressing through the various steps of the process. Here we are going to demo just a couple of components because of time reasons. And we wanted to start with component 1, which concerns user-centric processes and ready for automation. So the first question here that we identified, it was, have you identified the business processes that are or will be affected by your policy initiatives for administrations, businesses, and citizens? And actually here, Elena is quite lucky because in her team, there is already a business analyst named Miroslav, and they work on identifying these processes together and proceed to the next question. Which is, have you identified how these business processes can be modified having users' needs in mind? Have you asked the affected stakeholders for their needs to optimize processes? With the help of Miroslav, they model these business processes involved and they consult stakeholders about their needs. As you can see here below, we already introduced some of the possible next steps depending on the answers. With a relevant score that will be then be accumulated across the survey to build the digital readiness score. Since they managed to consider this how these business processes can be modified, then they tick yes and they proceed to the next question, which instead, in your view, could your initiative and the underlying business processes benefit from any form of digitalization? And here they're not really sure whether the initiative would benefit from it, so they tick I don't know, and they proceed to the next component, which is the alignment with digital policies. During the years, Elena's team here has gained an overview of the existing policies in the digital policies domain, and they know where to find the relevant resources, but in any case, they are prompted to consult this existing repository of digital policies, and they adjust the proposal accordingly. Then they tick yes and move to the next question. Have you identified the relevant EU and international standards that can be linked to the policy initiative so as to ensure consistencies? Here you can see there are some explanation about what a standard, an international standard applicable to a policy could be. And in this case, they're not aware of any existing standards for the transmission of data. They tick no and they move to the next question. So they keep on compiling the survey in this way, discussing, the team discusses among each other whether the various aspects and select I don't know or I'm not yet there when relevant. At the end of the presentation, you will also be able to find the complete set of questions together with the recommended actions and we will share the presentation later. After having finished to compile the survey with the support of her team, then Elena clicks on submit and can visualize the results. So she receives a score of 6 out of 12, around 50%, that would place her between a fair and good digital readiness index. This, although, suggests that her policy proposal could be more digital ready, and that they are asked later or suggested to retake the survey when it's going to be more mature. For each question, we prepared a set of actionable recommendations based on the answers. So they go through the results of this survey and they identified the suggested actions and a set of suggested services asking, they contact the suggested services asking for support when relevant. After this initial result, they also check the digital requirements of better regulation that they will need to respect. As they answered, I don't know, in question 3, the question related to whether the business processes would benefit from digitalization, they're therefore invited to contact their DG's IT team or the Digital Ready Policymaking Support Service. If they find out that the initiative would benefit from digitalization, then they would be required to assess the ICT impacts of the policy file. And as they later ticked that their initiative would concern public services and could potentially involve cross-border data flows, Elena learns that it is very likely that the policy initiative will have to include an interoperability assessment. Periodically, then, they retake this survey, and every time they click on the result, they receive further information on the available support services that could help them in refining their proposal. So this was the user journey, and we already tested the tool with some of our colleagues. We received some initial feedback, and we realized that the tool is somehow lacking in the user experience, and we received mainly 5 kinds of suggestions. The first one, it was the development of a user journey that you just saw to visualize the policy design process. They suggested also that we could simplify and provide more explanation on the terminology contained in the check. Some colleagues also suggested that we could provide a shorter survey by adopting a 2-step approach, like for example is happening in some member states. And then they suggested a set of more actionable and easily understandable recommendations. And finally, they suggested to transform the tool into a living survey that would allow for an iterative approach. And here I finished my presentation, and I leave the floor again to Sofia.
Yes. Many thanks, Alessio. So indeed, you can see that we also use this occasion now today to get your first feedback on whether we are working in the right direction, and also help us to set the right direction where to move from here further. We used as a blueprint, as Alessio presented, our own so-called better regulation guidance material. Better regulation is the rule book of the Commission to its policy officers, how to design a new policy proposal. And among that, there is this little visual with the 6 components for digital ready policymaking. And in this survey, in this digital ready checks, we wanted to use the occasion on the one hand to just explain what is these guidelines in simpler terms to our policy officers, and at the same time help them to measure and take action on how to achieve that. So here we are at the moment, and we are really, really happy if you get any feedback. To start that, we invite you as well to take the survey again. This time, it will be, you will see it's more, we have more general questions first on the usefulness of digital ready checks in general, and then we will have room for more specific advice for our tools. And here I would already place a call to you that we didn't go in depth of the detail of the content of the survey of all the questions. It was really a teaser now, but Alessio already told you that we shared the slides with you. There you will have this overview. So we are happy to get in touch with any of you interested on the content as well, how we formulate some questions, which questions to place, not place. But today, also for the reason of this setting, let's focus more on, is this tool, is in general kind of digital ready checklists useful in your view? So this is the first question in our poll. And this time I invite you to go right away to Slido, all of us taking our phones, scanning the QR code, or now just typing Slido, and let's see the first answers. So please join us. I see that participants are joining slowly. So again, here, not only think of this tool, also the German colleagues tool in general, this instrument that we provide for our policymakers, a kind of checklist, a survey, a very easy guidelines, how to achieve this cultural shift, what to consider, how do you perceive, is it needed, useful, not so useful. Let's wait for colleagues to arrive in the Slido and share their views. And of course, in the meantime, you also feel free to use the chat to raise any other questions, or if you want to look back some specific slides you couldn't read and would like to reflect on it. So far it's encouraging that our work in general was in Germany and the EC is not fruitless or useless. So, but there also I see and I take note of the more cautious replies. So I see it slightly useful or moderately useful. And if you feel that it's not useful at all, especially for you, I would really love to see, for example, how else, in which different manner you would approach this mind shift, this cultural change. If we don't give checklists, then what else we can do? Now we move the question, and some of you started replying that accepting that we still, majority of the answers show that it's something useful, such digital red checks, to whom we need to address those. Please stay with this question on the audience. So this question that who do you think should be the primary target audience of such digital ready checks? So essentially policy officers, as they are the pen holder, or mainly we should empower colleagues with implementation experience to feed their experience in policymaking, or maybe the data experts or the IT experts, or eventually all of them. And I see that most of you indeed and in the meantime, I seeing some interesting questions like business process is often at the heart of this. Any business process notation and or system used? No, not yet. And here exactly where we get very much inspired by the visualization tools of the German colleagues as well. By the way, in the commission, there is some kind of business process modeling knowledge center, and I call in my colleague Cecile if she knows more on what specific system they are using there, but it remains quite remote from the policy officers, so they don't use it. And just to tell you that this is where we get quite some recommendations, not even to use the terminology business process in our questions. This was the question Alessio showcased you, that very first question of us, and very similar idea like the German example that policy design should start with this business process overview. But we got this feedback, especially from policy teams, that but business process is not telling for us this term. We don't use this term in policy making. So already this cultural change, cultural gap, it's interesting. Yeah, so basically policy officers and also most of the other colleagues or profiles should be consulted. And then moving on to the third question in the poll, we also ask you to prioritize that what this surveys or checks should basically give a kind of general understanding their digital readiness of their policy proposals and maybe concrete proposals, how to move from there, or identifying the concrete mandatory requirements to address, because it's important to know they are not necessarily the same. So imagine there, in my view, a policy proposal can be digital ready even if it's not using digital at all. But for example, in digital ready drafting, they need to at least ensure that they don't lock in and be avoidant of any new technology. So yes, maybe it's also important to identify the mandatory requirements and also could help to identify the team members. But I see that here the answers guide us. The checks should eventually more focus on concrete actions, how to address mandatory digital requirements, how to make our policy proposal more digital ready, and the team aspects should be possibly decoupled. So it's really useful for us. And then the last two questions now, however, it's really for you to help us to improve the digital ready checks in the EC. So while these first three questions, I think, are applicable for the German colleagues as well, here on the fourth question, help us prioritizing where to step up now our efforts. So we see we produce this first version, we test it in-house, we testing now with you a little bit, and where we act. And I see that it's rather even, but we would need to work more on the actionable and easily understandable recommendations. So this should be and it's coherent with your previous answers from the audience that this should be the main focus. Then the user journey. So if you have already feedback on the first user journey we came up, it's also very nice to get the terminology and speak the same plain language, and possibly to have this iterative approach later on. So that means that they can come back, they can keep the survey, leave, and finish it later. And this shorter survey and two-step approach, it's interestingly not on the forefront, maybe because it's not also super clear what we meant by that. So what we meant here is that instead of providing a full Monty survey right away with, I don't know, we have now 20 some questions, have a very short one, like a litmus test, just to figure out, will be their digital technologies used or not? And provide a more lengthy questionnaire only if they say yes for this litmus paper. And this was what we saw also in the German example, that there is a short few checks questions. Jakob or Katharina may drop here how many questions they apply in the, I think 5 questions in the beginning, just to tell you, do you need to deal more with digital ready? And then you can go to the visualization experience, for example. And then the last bit, it's really an open commenting session. Here you can, and we get inputs, super. And now it's a bit difficult for me because I will start here with the Slido and then go to the chat, because I see that there is also questions possibly or ideas. So in the poll, what I see, we should, it moved up. The tool should apply at various stages of policy making, not just once. Perhaps start the tool with the question, at what stage the policy making you are? Okay, thank you. Simplify the questions, one thing in each question. Excellent. This also came up in the previous feedback sessions. Yes, moving on. Do you have any more specific load drafting advice on an outcome type architecture, story, relevant content of legal instruments? We have more specific advice on digital ready drafting, not so much on these details of load drafting. So digital ready drafting, I mean, like, we give general advice not to put too much technical specificities in the legal requirements, to keep some flexibility, or set the date entry into force on a date which is not after bank holidays, because then implementation and IT support will be not available. So we have a sort of digital ready drafting advice, but not going, for example, in the selection of legal instrument, because it's happening in the commission at an earlier stage. Visualization of business process to improve visualization, we are absolutely on the same page. Training and understanding digital ready checks, indeed, this is in our radar, and we will develop accompanying trainings when the checks will be ready. And if there is no more yet, but please use on the top there was something more on the, yes, digital ready checks need to be related to national digital ecosystems and regulatory frameworks. Besides, there are more process-oriented policies, but there's more general. It is difficult to see how to apply digital tech to the latter, meaning, sorry, the latter was the more general ones. Yes, indeed. So it's also that the policies can be very different, and even also depending, and we also see this for the IT implementation, that usually the overarching legislations like high-level regulations, directives, or decisions could be still quite open on setting the objectives. And then there are implementing and delegated acts which go to the real digital implementation. So this is also something we can factor in, and a checklist can have, but a methodology, yeah, for like project management, we need also complementing the checks. I agree. And then looking at the chat as well. Well, yeah, so maybe Annika, if you want, you volunteered, and I would ask Alessio to move you to the panelists, because Annika from the Northern Controlrat Secretariat from Germany has several questions and happy to take the floor. So Annika, well, here you are.
Thank you
Welcome.
very much for your presentation. We're really glad that we got these insights about the next steps you want to take, and we're in this journey as well. As Jakob told you before, the NKI, we are scrutinizing the digital checks and have been doing it for 1 year now. I was asking myself, because we're struggling with it as well, how this persona you presented will foresee all the potential IT needs of all the member states we have, like in Germany as a background, and I can imagine you have the same in your states, that like their IT infrastructure is really not centralized. So we have so many different IT systems, and already in Germany, it's difficult to analyze whether they're like interoperable with each other. But I can imagine where this comes from, because my Danish colleague, he told me that they're doing it like that and it works. So I'm curious about that. And I'm also, I think it's really cool that you already have an online tool that you're considering. And but what we're also dealing with in our normal scrutinizing work, let's say, is that there's this huge impact assessment of the Commission, and as I understood, this would also be part of it. And afterwards, in the trilogue, you will have so many changes that maybe even if you really consider the digital readiness of the legislation, there can be so many like changes that maybe afterwards it's not digital ready anymore. So I was wondering whether you also thought about that, and maybe you have already ideas on that. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you for the questions. I may start, and then Alessio, if you wish, you come in to complement. So starting maybe from the end, the trilogue and changes in the negotiations. So indeed, from 2016, there is an interinstitutional agreement between the Council, Parliament, and the European Commission on better lawmaking, which in principle brings an agreement that whenever there are significant changes proposed by the co-legislators, they also complement the impact assessment, or at least call upon the Commission to do so. But in practice, it's still not happening, and this is something, if you follow this kind of better regulation communications from the Commission, it comes up regularly that the Commission keeps teasing the Council and the Parliament to step up and do it. And just yesterday, I was consulted on a position of the Commission of specific policy proposal in negotiations in the Council and Parliament, where exactly they add now an important IT requirement, just set up a website and reporting system, which was not foreseen in the initial proposal, and most probably it will be without any proper assessment. So here it's beyond our team's competence, let's say, but of course we at all levels try to slowly reach out to the other institutions support teams to see what else could be done, and keeping it on the agenda. But here, and it also links back to your first question on the IT landscape, I think, and I trust that this upcoming Interoperable Europe Act can bring a lot of help, because what this act will bring is a so-called interoperability assessment instrument, which will specifically require both the Commission but all administrations and institutions as well to run this interoperability assessment before any binding decisions or significant modifications are taken, and it impacts IT systems supporting trans-European cross-border services, digital services. And this is something, of course, it will need time, but could be at least a kind of mandatory tool to push and say, okay, the Commission did this interoperability assessment on its policy proposal, and when doing so, it can call upon the support of the also future instrument called Interoperable Europe Board, so kind of board among also member states representatives who coordinate this interoperability landscape in their own member states. So this board can also feed advice in this early phase how to ensure that the new system planned and assessed in a Commission proposal will fit in the big puzzle. And then if after this adoption and Commission proposal in the negotiation phase there are changes, in principle they should do and complement this interoperability assessment. But of course this is still now just a hopeful thinking that it will happen. And yes, I agree that at this stage in a policy proposal at the Commission level, colleagues most probably, even if you say that at a member state level it's difficult to oversee all the IT developments and the landscape, it's even more difficult than at higher level. But that's why one of our main call, and in the checks here among the questions you also see we identified the audience of colleagues with implementation knowledge. So we push this message to the Commission policy officer that you don't stop in-house knowledge gathering, but you really try to find those in the member states or in specific agencies who have an overview of what's working in the IT implementation landscape, what is problematic, and you feed in this in your policy design. And on the tooling, so this survey is now placed on EU survey. And maybe here, Alessio, you want to come in also. So I think this is an open source one and the recommended one. Yes.
Yes. We have been adopting EU survey because it's the official tool for surveys within the European Commission. But of course, we have been exploring also other open source tools. And actually, if you have any suggestions on potential tooling, we are open to that. And I also see a question from Massimo Torresi on developing the checks tool as an open source expandable one with possible plugins, customization for the different policy domains and further checks. Of course, this would be very useful to get the feedbacks on the specific content and somehow getting a more complete overview of the various aspects. At the same time, we are also have been paying attention on the complexity of it. We know that policy officers need to answer and have to fulfill a lot of different requirements, and this adds to the complexity of establishing of building a tool that is at the same time very effective and to the point, but at the same time it doesn't put additional burden to the policy officer. And then I saw also another question, and this I think this also answered the question from Jasper. And I saw another question on the various phases. Yes, when we mean by transforming it, the one of the feedback that we got, it was on transforming it in a living survey. Defining, we meant by that it's better to start at the earliest in order to avoid, in order to include the digital considerations at the early stage, but at the same time, it could be readapted and the policy officer could fill it as long as it is useful to it. Also something that I wanted to underline, this is not a mandatory tool. It's a guidance tool, but and it was thought as a guidance tool, but in order to support officers, and it's not at this stage a mandatory requirement.
And maybe then I'm mindful of the time, so we are closing now. Maybe just two questions. It grabs my attention. So also on the supervision, and it comes handy that we got the question also from Annika on who is in such kind of regulatory board in Germany. So for the time being, in the Commission, the regulatory scrutiny board is not first, the checks are not there, but they also don't have in their mandate to then verify the results of the checks. So this kind of audit assurance, what was proposed by Massimo, is not yet there, but we trust that it can evolve. At least the regulatory scrutiny board now started scrutinizing whether the digital by default principle is applied. It's just a part of the big digital ready cake, but a first step. And then I also read this valid point, okay, in policy making, you have a lot of competing priorities, so it should be sustainable, economically feasible, equality, mainstreaming, and then digital, and then everyone would create their surveys. It's not sustainable. Though I argue that, and that's why I would underline the mindset that for me, digital ready is now it's basically already mainstream in the sense that digital is everywhere and each and every policy is using it in the implementation phase. And that's why for me, it should happen very early. And somehow, yeah, I still argue that among the competing priorities, it needs to get priority because it's an enabler for all the others as well. But on the format, whether it's a survey and how not to just overload also the policy officers, I'm also always happy to discuss. And basically 1 minute left, so we can just bring back the farewell side as usual. But I'm very happy that I see that a kind of exchange and discussion started in the chat, and exactly this is what we need. And we are also happy in the community as such to work with and find out better ways to interact with each other. So please stay with us, because now we are under this better legislation for smoother implementation heading, but from next year on, we would like to a bit rebaptize, reshape this community, call it digital ready policymaking community, and also find better ways to really move in co-creation and have this spirit that we learn from each other, because this is the intention. So stay with us, look at our upcoming events like this community gathering early next year, and the webinar, as I mentioned, in a new format on lowest code. So we are very happy to see you back there, and keep up this discussion going. So you will get the slide deck if you want to come in on content creation. I'm very up to share at it, create maybe an open source tool that you can reuse it. Let's see, create some kind of joint projects around it. And with that, thanks again to our speakers, Jakob and Katharina from Germany, for Alessio, the nice presentation, and see everyone soon, and have a nice end year season with a lot of nice and joyful memories. Thank you. Bye.